What you're about to hear was never supposed to leave the room. Not polished for headlines, not softened for public comfort. This was the kind of story meant to stay buried, because once it's spoken out loud, there's no rewinding it, no pretending you didn't hear it. According to Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, Meghan Markle's past carries a chapter that was never meant to surface. Not whispered speculation, not online rumor, something far heavier. Something that didn't begin with Prince Harry, fairy tale expectations, or palace gates, but far out on open water, away from cameras, aboard Prince Andrew's yacht. And that's where the tone changes completely, because Sarah Ferguson isn't just floating vague claims. She alleges something far more dangerous. She says there are materials, private ones, letters that were never meant to be read by anyone else, recordings that were never meant to be heard again, moments preserved in ways that don't fade with time, just waiting. According to her, Meghan wasn't simply present in Andrew's orbit, she had a role in it, and the phrase used to describe that role is so chilling it reframes everything that came after. His first client. If even part of that phrase holds weight, then the story the public was told about Meghan's rise doesn't just crack, it collapses inward on itself. Sarah Ferguson didn't choose those words casually. When she described Meghan Markle as Prince Andrew's first client, it wasn't the language of romance or coincidence. It wasn't the careless vocabulary of gossip. It was deliberate, sharp, and deeply unsettling. A client isn't someone who drifts into a situation by accident. A client implies arrangement, understanding, expectation. It implies that something was exchanged, whether it was ever written down or acknowledged publicly or not. That single phrase tears apart the idea that Meghan's early proximity to Andrew was innocent or accidental. It reframes those yacht appearances as purposeful, structured, known. According to Sarah's account, Meghan wasn't just a guest tagging along for champagne and sun. She was noticed early, engaged privately, treated as someone whose presence went beyond polite social circles. And this is where the story veers into darker territory, because if Meghan was Andrew's first client, then it suggests the beginning of a pattern. Not just for Andrew, but for Meghan herself. A moment where access, intimacy, and opportunity quietly intersected. For Prince Harry, hearing that phrase would have felt like a punch to the chest. He had spent years publicly distancing himself from Andrew, rejecting everything his uncle represented, and suddenly the woman he married, the woman he defended against the world, was being described with language that tied her directly into that same shadowed orbit. This wasn't just uncomfortable, it was destabilizing. Stories can be denied, memories can be challenged, motives can be questioned, but physical evidence changes everything. According to Sarah Ferguson, that's where this stopped being something she could ignore. She claims she came across letters, private correspondence that directly tied Meghan to those yacht days with Andrew. These weren't formal notes. They weren't stiff, polite exchanges. They were personal, familiar, written with a tone that suggested shared history and comfort. Handwriting mattered. References mattered. The letters, as Sarah describes them, included details only someone who had actually been there would know. Small moments, inside jokes, mentions of specific places on board that casual guests wouldn't even notice. This wasn't the language of strangers, and when Sarah read them, she didn't dismiss them as coincidence or misunderstanding. She recognized exactly what they represented, proof that what she remembered hadn't existed only in her own mind. For years, those letters stayed hidden, held on to, weighed, feared. Because once paper speaks, it doesn't take sides. It simply exists. And with those letters, the story crossed a line. It moved from something someone claimed to remember to something someone claimed to hold in their hands. But even letters leave space for denial. Ink can be questioned. Pages can be challenged. Voices are different. Voices change the temperature of a story entirely. And according to Sarah Ferguson, that's where the illusion of deniability finally shattered. She claims there are recordings, not descriptions, not recollections, actual audio, preserved conversations that were never meant to live beyond the moment they were spoken. She says these recordings captured private exchanges between Prince Andrew and Meghan during those yacht days. Conversations that sounded relaxed, familiar, unguarded. The tone people use only when they believe no one else is listening. This is the point of no return. A voice carries rhythm, emotion, personality. It cannot be separated from the person who owns it. And for Prince Harry, the idea that his wife's voice could exist in private conversation with the uncle he openly despised would have been unbearable. Because once you hear something like that, you don't just hear sound. You hear your entire understanding of the past rearranging itself. The presence of recordings meant this story was no longer theoretical. It no longer relied on belief alone. It became something that could surface at any moment, something that could be played, replayed, recognized. And that knowledge alone was enough to destabilize everything. No one carried a heavier emotional burden burden from these allegations than Prince Harry himself. His adult identity has been built on rejection. Rejection of royal hypocrisy, rejection of secrecy, rejection of the very man at the center of this storm. He drew lines, he took stands, he walked away. And according to these claims, the past crossed those lines without his knowledge. Imagine that collision. The woman he protected at all costs. The uncle he cut off completely, suddenly connected by a history he never saw coming. This wasn't about jealousy, it wasn't about pride. It was humiliation layered on top of loyalty. Harry didn't just love Meghan, he built his entire public fight around her innocence. He positioned himself as her shield. And shields crack when they're built on stories that may not be complete. According to accounts linked to the fallout, Harry withdrew. He swung between anger and disbelief, between demanding explanations and clinging to denial, because accepting even the possibility meant facing something worse than betrayal. It meant facing the idea that he might not have been the beginning of her story, but the final chapter of something that started long before him. Inside royal circles, silence is never accidental. When these claims began circulating behind closed doors, there was no immediate denial, no firm rebuttal, no carefully worded correction. There were quiet meetings, phone calls that never turned into statements. The palace understood the stakes instantly. Andrew's scandals had already wounded the monarchy deeply. To connect Meghan, a woman who publicly challenged the institution, directly to Andrew's private world wasn't just embarrassing, it was catastrophic. So the response wasn't confrontation, it was containment. Silence became strategy. Acknowledging the story risked validating it. Denying it risked provoking proof. And proof, according to Sarah Ferguson, existed in forms the palace couldn't control. Behind the scenes, confidence gave way to fear. Not fear of headlines, fear of what else might surface if this thread was pulled any further. The monarchy has survived storms before, but this one threatened to tie together too many dark chapters at once. That's why no one rushed to speak. This wasn't a story Sarah Ferguson told lightly. She stayed silent for years, but when she finally spoke, she didn't hint. She didn't dance around it. She made a direct claim. Meghan had multiple encounters on Prince Andrew's yachts, and those encounters weren't accidental. If true, this doesn't just add a footnote to Meghan's past. It rewrites the opening page of her royal journey entirely. And for Harry, a man who spent his life trying to escape Andrew's shadow, the implications were devastating. Secrets cut deeper when they involve the people you trust the most. The yacht itself isn't just a backdrop, it's the foundation of everything. According to Sarah Ferguson, Andrew's yachts were built for one purpose above all else: privacy. Out at sea, away from cameras, away from witnesses, away from accountability. The usual rules didn't apply, titles blurred, boundaries softened. What happened on board stayed on board. These weren't casual outings. They were recurring retreats, carefully controlled environments where powerful people could relax without fear of exposure. Champagne flowed, conversations loosened, relationships formed away from public eyes. According to Sarah, Meghan wasn't unfamiliar with this world. She didn't wander into it once by chance. She returned. She became familiar. She understood how that floating world operated, and that's why the yacht matters. It explains how proximity was possible, how repetition happened, how a future duchess could exist inside royal shadows long before the public ever knew her name. And once that door opens, the story doesn't slow down, because the most unsettling part isn't what's already been revealed, it's what hasn't. Somewhere, according to Sarah Ferguson, letters still exist that the public has never read. Recordings still exist that the world has never heard. Evidence kept quiet not because it lacks power, but because it holds too much. At the center of it all is that yacht, a vessel that once drifted quietly across open water, carrying laughter, secrets, and moments no one thought would matter years later. A place where reputations were unguarded, where intentions were whispered, where history turned without anyone realizing it. Prince Harry believed leaving the palace meant leaving the past behind. But the past doesn't respect distance. It waits, it resurfaces, and sometimes it returns with names you never expected to hear spoken together. Whether these claims ever fully explode into the open or remain locked away, one thing is impossible to ignore. The story Meghan told the world may not have begun where we were led to believe. And if that yacht could speak, if its polished decks and quiet cabins could tell their story, this wouldn't feel like an ending at all. It would feel like the beginning of something far darker, because ghosts don't disappear when you walk away from them. They follow. And that's the part that keeps people awake at night, because unfinished stories have a way of breathing on their own. According to those close enough to sense the tension, this wasn't just a scandal that flared and faded. It lingered. It sat in conversations that stopped when someone entered the room. It lived in glances that lasted half a second too long. There was a feeling that something fragile had been stepped on, something that could crack loudly if too much pressure was applied. And Harry, caught in the middle of it all, was left carrying questions no one wanted to answer out loud. Questions that don't scream, but whisper, slowly eroding certainty. Because when trust is shaken, even love starts to feel unfamiliar. You replay moments, you reread conversations, you wonder which silences meant more than words. What made it worse was the waiting, not knowing if today would be the day something surfaced, not knowing if a voice, a letter, a detail would suddenly appear and turn private doubt into public spectacle. That kind of tension doesn't explode, it suffocates. And inside that suffocation, every memory starts to feel suspicious, every timeline feels blurred, every explanation feels either too rehearsed or painfully incomplete. People assume secrets are heavy because of what they hide, but often they're heavy because of what they force you to imagine. And somewhere beneath all of this, the yacht still exists as more than a setting. It exists as a symbol of a world that doesn't leave fingerprints easily, a world where power insulates itself, where stories are shaped by who controls access and who controls silence. Whether anything more ever comes out or not, that shadow doesn't disappear. It settles into history quietly, shaping perceptions long after the noise dies down. Because once doubt enters a story this big, it doesn't need proof to survive, it just needs time. And time, unlike headlines, never stops moving forward.